Okay, so I started out just before the recording started. We had a little conversation about people's preconceptions or ideas about India. And part of the purpose of asking about that was because yoga is an interface with India. Yoga is inseparable from India, and that may be um, what we see around currently in the United States and in the West as yoga. Um, when the word yoga is used, it's not always directly, the direct connection to India is not always apparent. Sometimes it's partially apparent, sometimes it's not apparent at all. But the word yoga is a Sanskrit word that is used historically in India and has been used for thousands of years to talk about the fundamental aspiration to know who we are, the fundamental search for who am I, what's going on here, and why do things hurt? Why do we suffer? Why do we die? Why is there calamity? These basic things about life that we want to know. This is what yoga is. That search for the self. What is there beyond my personality, beyond my beliefs, beyond my preferences? So when we think about, this yoga, this ancient yoga that pours through the history of India into the modern day, we have to see both sides of that. We have to see, America, it pours through ancient India and into the modern day West, where we are sitting. We have to acknowledge where we are, what we bring to it, and then we also look to this ancient stream and what is it? Where does it come from? What terrain has it passed through? What has it gathered along the way? What are its roots? What are its sources? We have to know all that, and we also have to know what's up with my, what do I bring? What do I think? What are my assumptions? I was saying before, I've been to India many times, and I also have assumptions about India because I grew up in the United States and I watched movies and TV shows and I saw caricatures of people and customs and cultural artifacts. So it's important for me to recognize that. The other thing that I bring is just my mind and the way my mind is constructed to think. English is a linear language. There's a subject and a verb and a direct object. There's I did this. I ate dinner. It's a linear language. Sanskrit is less linear. There's not a preposition. There's not to the movies. There's one word that holds that whole idea together. And also, our language is very fact focused, detail focused, idea focused. Language developed from the general to the specific. And ancient languages are still in that little bit of a more kind of hazy space when it comes to the relationship between the general and the specific. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But our language and the way that we think and the way that we're conditioned to think and the way that we relate to the world is not universal. We who speak English in the United States are living a very specific experience, and that experience primes us to interact with the ancient science of yoga in a very specific way. So some of those differences between like what we, the milieu that we're living in, the intellectual milieu that we're living in, and the milieu of India, ancient India. I mean, I guess that's the other thing. It's like even there's this kind of shrinking of the world in all the positive and negative ways, all the things that are gained and all the things that are lost. in the world becoming one. And so cultures, kind of the edges of cultures, bleed into each other in some areas. And I remember the first time I went to India in 2000, I stayed with a family in a village, and they had no furniture in the house. The kitchen was outside in a little hut with a peat roof. There was no toilet or bathroom facilities in the house, but there was a TV, and the TV had one channel, and the kind of architecture of the house, the way the house was arranged, was around the TV. And this was just kind of the beginning of that phenomena. And now I go back to the same village, and everybody's got a cell phone, and everybody's watching TikTok and YouTube, and everybody's on Instagram and Facebook. So just in the past 20 years, probably 10 years before that, nobody had a TV. And then when I was there, there's one TV in the house, and it's kind of like the main event, and it's got one channel. And then 20 years later, 23 years later, it's a completely different world. And so what we're talking about, and especially when we think about the Rig Veda and the Rig Veda Samhita, is ancient India, the source, the place where these ideas, these yogic ideas, were being germinated. The way people experience themselves in relation to their surroundings and in relationship to each other and community was vastly different than the way we do. And some of the kind of commonalities, some of the generalities about that are that we in the West tend to think in a way that's very compact and precise. We think about facts, we think about single ideas, we break things down, we dissect them, we take a small thing and we act like it's the whole. We look at the stomach in the body, and we really try to understand all aspects of the stomach. And there are people who specialize in just the stomach, and they don't know that much about the lungs. I mean, they know general stuff about the lungs, but they know more than I do about the lungs, but that's not their specialty. And if they're not going to have a breakthrough in the area of the lungs because they're focused on the stomach. When you go to college, most universities, there's different departments, and the departments, maybe more and more there's a cutting edge of multidisciplinarianism, but we focus on one subject at a time. The historians focus on history, the physicists focus on physics, the linguists focus on linguistics, the artists focus on art. And this kind of bridging or the wholeness is often lost, and there's a sacrifice there. We lose comprehension, integration, wholeness. In the East, and especially in ancient India, there is more of a focus, there's more of an openness to the whole. There's more of a sense of intuition and focusing on and valuing the whole more than each of the individual parts. There tends to be like a assimilation of individual pieces into wholes, and an assimilation of individual ideas or individual facts into whole truths, whereas we would tend to dissect and classify our observations and make maps of the minutiae of all the million things. So even in the context of evolution, the kind of Western scientific awakening to evolution was very focused on the outward facts of terrestrial evolution. When you look back at the Vedas and the Upanishads, there's a general underlying reality of cosmic evolution, of the evolution of the soul. But that's the deeper, the wider, the more underlying sweep of evolution, and not a fixation on exactly how it happened and when it happened and where it happened and all that. I think the main thing that I would like us to keep in mind about this is that we tend to assume that our way is better. It's just how people are. We tend to assume that the scientific, dissection and classification of ideas is the better way. And whether any individual person in this space or who's listening to me right now, they actually thinks that one way is better, it's not really the point. It's that we're surrounded by a culture and by media and by voices reinforcing the idea that our way is superior to the other way. And the other way is maybe flimsy or weak or unscientific. To explore an intuition rather than dissecting and verifying a fact is not really it's not hard science. So it's just important to acknowledge and recognize these differences when we're exploring a text like the Rig Veda, which is very symbolic and not very direct and not very specific and not very linear and not very focused on classifying ideas and dissecting concepts. It's an intuitive exposition. It's a declaration of profound intuitive truths. And it's done in a way that's very symbolic and poetic. So in order for us to touch that, we have to see what is it in me that is a little bit hesitant about that. How does that fit with my understanding or assumptions about life? If we really want to touch it, if we really want to experience it, we have to first recognize the things that are going to get in the way of that experience, and then see what we can do. See what we can we pull back a little bit? Can we allow for something else to happen? Otherwise, we can look at it just like the, I guess, 19th century British academics looked at the Rig Veda. We can approach it with the same kind of academic scrutiny, and we can read the hymns in kind of the same spirit, and we can declare that the whole Rig Veda is just this animistic nonsense. It's like primitive people babbling about things that don't make any sense. And sometimes they're talking about the sun, and sometimes they're talking about the ocean and the rivers and the rains and the storms, and they're praying for rain, and they're asking that the sun will rise. And they're just kind of these nature-oriented primitive ideas that don't have any depth to them, which is basically what a lot of the European scholars said about, especially when they were contacting the Rig Veda. The Upanishads are a lot easier to access, and so it was harder to throw the whole thing away. What they said about the Upanishads was that there were these glimmers of truth in the midst of a bunch of nonsense. And the nonsense is the Rig Veda Samhita has much more of that, what would have been called nonsense, because it's symbolic, it's layered, it's nuanced, and it's poetic. And it's you have to both understand the context, and you have to understand, like what I said before about language first evolving from generalities to specifics. So there's a word in Sanskrit called, or a word, I guess we'll just, vrka, V-R-K-A. It's V-R-K-A, vrka. It means to tear, right? So this is the sense of this word, is to tear something apart. Eventually, it also means a wolf. But the reason it means a wolf is because a wolf tears. And the wolf comes after. First, there's this essential sense of to tear. And then there's this, the specific of the wolf. The word dhenu, D-H-E-N-U, means to nourish, to nurture, to take care of. So that sense of it comes first. And then the specific cow, the specific thing that they're talking about, comes later. So the Vedas the Rig Veda Samhita in particular plays on this tension between the general sense of a word and the specific meaning of it. And it has these dimensions, it kind of layers these dimensions so that a verse can be seen as referring to material reality. It can also be seen as referring to psychological reality, and it can be referring to a spiritual reality. And these three layers are named. One of them is the material layer is Adibhuta. So the Adibhuta layer is that they're talking about the sun, and they are talking about the sun because the sun does rise every day, and the sun does sit in the sky and look down on everything, and the sun does provide warmth to everyone, and the sun does get covered over by a cloud. These are material things that happen, and they're real, and they make it, we can observe them. The other layer is Adidaiva. This is Adhi, Adhidaiva, Adidaiva. Adhidaiva. Daiva comes from Deva. It's basically like the layer of the Devas, of the radiance, of the kind of energetic, the layer of reality between material and spiritual. The layer of reality that's connected to dreams and daydreaming and things that you sense and feel. So then we're talking about the sun, not just in a physical way that it's illuminating, but also in a kind of energetic way that it shines and provides warmth, and it provides, clarity. Or Agni, it provides, it's like Agni is fire, and there's light in the darkness. It lights up the darkness in the middle of the night. So when there's no other way to see, then you can see that's a material reality, and it's also a emotional reality. It provides warmth, emotional warmth. It provides a feeling of connection. It provides a feeling of safety and protection. So Adibhuta and Adidaiva, and then the Adhyatma. Adhyatma is the soul level, the spiritual level. So the sun also sees everything. It sees not just what's happening, but it is the revealer of the truth, the spiritual truth. And as the revealer of the truth, it is the radiator of the truth. And the truth is oneness. The truth is something that cannot be articulated into words, but it's the fundamental unity of all existence and the reality of the divine. And the Agni is the fire that reaches up towards the heavens. It's the aspiration to know the truth. And this fundamental truth, this word truth and the idea of truth and the seeking of truth, this is what the Rig Veda Samhita is all about. It's about the tension between truth and falsehood, light and darkness, illumination and obscuration. But before we get too deep into that, I want to just back up a little bit and say that India's history is the story of its unfolding spiritual mission. India has held a purpose for the earth, and the earth as an awakening being is in its own process of evolution of consciousness, the evolution of its own self-realization. And in the course of that self-realization, India has held, it's like the ancient truths of the Vedas were a gift given long before it was possible to even conceive of a unified earth where all of humanity was connected, and all of humanity was, we're at a place now with the internet and with all the proliferation of channels that everybody in the world has access to, for better or worse. We're at a point where even if we can't conceive of it socially, even if it's just like it'll never happen, even if we feel like whatever, the world is going to hell, look all around, at least we can see the material logistical possibility of humanity being connected. And we're dealing with problems that have no other solution other than all of humanity deciding to solve them together. the climate situation, nuclear war. I mean, these are things that, like, unless humanity decides all together to get together on this, it's not going to work out. And so we're being pushed towards that. And this is, rewind 2,000, 10,000, 15,000 years, whenever these Vedic seers revealed what, received and codified the wisdom. This is long before, but it's very relevant to our current situation, profoundly relevant. So India has held this wisdom, gathered it, contained it, and held it for thousands and thousands of years. And we don't really know how many thousands, but it has been passed down faithfully from generation to generation to generation. And part of the faithfulness of that, this was even before there was a written script. Devanagari is the name of the script in which the Sanskrit language is written. Devanagari, the Vedas come before Devanagari. And it's even said that the Vedas come before everything, that the Vedas are immortal, that they were never born, that they exist before time, and they were received whole by the ancient rishis. But either way, they were received a very long time ago, and they were memorized, and they were chanted. And, the amount of human energy that it took to preserve this wisdom generation after generation, all the way through to today, is incredible. And if you've heard Vedic chanting, this kind of very specific meter and cadence and tone, everything is scientifically prescribed so that it's chanted the same way. And there are variations, there's different schools that do it kind of differently, but for the most part, there's a huge amount of fidelity. And this is thousands of years before writing, you think about before videotapes and audio tapes, but this is before writing. So India did this. I am not saying India is a person that did it consciously, or that there was some president of India or some, intentional thing, but whatever the intention was, India did this, contained and held these spiritual texts for thousands of years on behalf of humanity, for humanity, so that the wisdom and the teachings and the secrets of these teachings could be contained and offered. And they were offered they kind of spread out throughout India in many different ways in the different eras of India's history. They spread out through the Upanishadic era, and they spread out through the era of the epics and the Puranas, the different kinds of texts, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita. These texts are translating and articulating, reinterpreting and reoffering the original teachings of the Rig Veda Samhita in all these different ways. And throughout India mostly, but then progressively throughout the wider world. The culture of India has been profoundly influenced by this reality. This stream of wisdom flowing through this population of people, this collection of people within this geographic area, shaped the culture of India. And to the point where calling Hinduism a religion is a bit of a stretch, because it wasn't ever really a religion until it interfaced with the outside. It was the Sanatana Dharma. It was just the eternal way of being, the eternal wisdom. And there was much more focus on realization and experience than there was on belief or dogma all along. And it was much more of a spiritual culture. And it spread itself out pervasively and tested 1,000,000 trillion different approaches. So it's like there's the Sanatana Dharma, it's like there's one divine reality, and there's something eternal beyond this mind, life, matter, ego. And it's not abstract. It's not negative. It's positive. It's conscious. It's alive. It's not an idea. It is a living spiritual truth, a power, and it is to be sought and lived. This is the essence of the Sanatana Dharma. There is something divine beyond this. And that something is not separate from this. There are layers of reality that connect this manifold, separated, confused, dualistic reality from that unified reality. There are dimensions between here and there, and we can travel from here to there through these dimensions of reality, through a spiritual discipline, through the process of purification, through tapas. And India has created and developed and provided innumerable maps, structures, paths, guides to support this journey. They've explored all the routes: dualism, qualified dualism, non-dualism, monism, atheism. Anything is possible. Logic, spiritual discipline, tapas, devotion, karma yoga, jnana yoga, all of it has been explored. And all of it is with the purpose of joining this material, divided, dualistic world with that one. So it's not just about, there is something out there and having a belief about it. It's about reaching it, touching it, and connecting it to this world. And this is the purpose for which the earth was created. And so India has been holding this deeper reality on behalf of the earth and all humanity for all these thousands of years as a kind of a fountain. And there's a general sense that many of the great thinkers and philosophers of the West, including Plato, including Jesus, the Buddha obviously was from India, that these great thinkers and great spiritual leaders from throughout history have all been influenced directly by Indian wisdom. It's like a fountain giving this immortal ambrosia, offering freely this immortal ambrosia for all humanity. So the Rig Veda specifically is basically the root, the source of this fountain, the Rig Veda Samhita. There's 4 Vedas, and each Veda has 4 parts. Of the 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda is the core, and the Sama, Yajur, and Atharva, they offer different things. A lot of what they're doing is contextualizing, reinterpreting, playing with the original hymns of the Rig Veda Samhita. So of the 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda is the core, central, original one. There's 4 parts of each Veda: Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, and Upanishad. The Samhita is the core of each Veda. So you don't have to memorize these aspects. The point is that the Rig Veda Samhita is the core of the core of the core. It's the central piece. It's where it all begins. And that all of the effluence, the flowering, the offering, the flowing of Indian wisdom and Indian spirituality starts there. It's not a small text. There's 10,552 mantras. There's 1,028 suktas. So the mantras are arranged into suktas. 10,000 or so mantras arranged into about 1,000 suktas, and 10 mandalas. So a mandala is kind of like a book, the bigger thing. And then within each mandala, say there's 100 suktas, and within each sukta, say there's 100 mantras, more or less. So each of those mantras has meter, is in a different meter, each one's in a different meter. There's certain meters that, I think there's 7 different meters that are used. And each one is to a specific deva. So it's a hymn to a deva. And a deva, the word deva has been translated into English as God, and that has a lot to do with the confusion about whether Indian spirituality is polytheistic. The word deva just means radiant one. So it's not, these are not Godheads. These are not many different Godheads. These are not many different ones. You know, there's one. That one has many different personalities, many different faces, many different moods, many different characteristics. Those are the devas. And there's a hierarchy of devas. So each of the riks, and a mantra is a hymn, and it's called a rik. That's why it's called the Rig Veda. So rik basically means hymn. When I said there's 10,552 mantras, there's 10,552 hymns, 10,552 riks, right? So you could say mantra or rik or hymn. Each rik has meter. Each rik is offered to a deva. And then there's several different rishis that are composers. Composers really the very wrong word. Each of these rishis received. So the riks, the suktas, the words, the hymns already existed before the rishi. They received them and infused their tapas into it and revealed it. So they're called, in the Rig Veda, they're called poets, they're called poet seers, they're called, you know, there's a distinguishment, there's a distinction made in Indian spirituality between that which is Shruti and that which is Smriti. Shruti is that which is heard, that which is received. Smriti is that which is remembered. So the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, these are Smriti texts. These are remembered, like what happened. Shruti texts are received. So they're received directly from the divine. They're supra-sensuous revelations. So they're not something that these people observed, these rishis observed with their senses and then wrote about. They are supra-sensuous. And they're timeless. Apaurushaya. They're timeless. They exist before time. They're spiritual, and their spiritual wisdom that is passing through a human person into sound and speech, and thus becoming material and accessible on a communal level. And I think it's important for us to consider, especially going back to this question about East and West, how do we relate to what is sacred, to what is immortal, to what is spiritual? There's a real, just a very small example. I was in Tiruvannamalai in South India last winter. And I like to walk around Arunachala. It's 8 miles about, and I like to go around. And I got up early one morning, was going around, and people do it with no shoes on. 8 miles on concrete is a lot with no shoes, so I wear shoes. And I came to this temple, and I had been walking for several miles, and it was early in the morning, and I don't eat, so I'm kind of in that zone. And there's a big stone outside of this. This is a really old temple, and there's a big stone outside of the temple that is considered a Swayambhu Ganesha. So it's a stone that looks like Ganesh. It just naturally, it just formed that way. Nobody did anything to it. It looks like Ganesh. So it's worshipped as Ganesh. And it's a super old temple. So that Ganesh has been there, for as long as that temple's been there. And I walked up to it with this kind of spirit of reverence, but I forgot to take my shoes off. And the guy who was protecting, honoring, keeping that space was not, what are you doing? And at first he's like, what are you doing? I was like, I don't know. What did I do? And it was that I hadn't taken my shoes off. He kind of looked down at my feet and was like, come on. So he was horrified. And, that, because it's sacred, because that space is sacred. And I had violated the sacredness of the space by wearing my shoes in there. And I think there's something, we're not used to that. we're not used to things being sacred and things having a different, you know, holding something differently because of its sacredness and treating it differently. But that's why the Vedas are here. That's why the Rig Veda Samhita exists after thousands and thousands of years, is because people treated it as sacred. They gave their lives to preserving it. Thousands and thousands, countless people gave their lives, spent their time protecting this wisdom and offering it. And so that's why we have it. And so it's an important consideration for us, you know, as we encounter these texts. What is sacred? How do we relate to it? How can we, you know, open ourselves to the sacredness and receive it as it is? There's a saying, Ananto vai Vedaha. Ananto vai Vedaha. The Vedas are immortal. The Vedas are infinite. The Vedas are immortal, and Ananta, it's like immortal, but it's also infinite. They contain everything. And the other thing I just want to say is that, well, I kind of already said this. The truth is one. Ekam Sat. Ekam Sat. The truth is one. This is from the Rig Veda itself. The truth is one. Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. The wise ones, the illumined ones, talk about it in lots of different ways, declare it in many different ways. But Ekam Sat, the truth is one. This is the central axis of the Veda, the Rig Veda Samhita. The truth is one, but there's a million ways to talk about it. It's one and it's infinite. And this is the spirit of India, the oneness, the honoring, the sacredness, and there's a million different ways. And the diversity and complexity that we as Westerners often encounter as chaos and overwhelmingness, the colors and the sounds and what about this mantra and what about this teaching, and doesn't that contradict it? And you know, this person says this and this. You can learn countless Indian teachings from countless Indian teachers and be completely overwhelmed and confused because they are infinite, and that's the point. It's pervasive, it's wide and vast and comprehensive, but all of it is one spirit, one flow, seeking the underlying Sat, Sat, Ekam Sat, the one. So this course, the 5 weeks of the course, we're going to get into, I don't know if you all saw, I posted at some point the specific schedule. We're going to get into some specific mantras and aspects of the Rig Veda Samhita. And let me see if I can. So the first week, this is kind of an introduction. And I'll talk a little bit more, introduce Sri Aurobindo a little bit, but it's basically just an introduction. The second week, we're going to talk about Agni. Agni is the divine flame, and we're going to spend time with mantras to Agni. And the third week, we're going to talk about Surya, the sun, illumination, light, the devas. The fourth week, we're going to talk about Indra and the Anjirasa rishis, and there's a particular myth about Indra and the Anjirasa rishis freeing the cows from the pen. So we're going to explore the specific mantras that hold this, and really kind of, so there's going to be much more kind of digging into the actual text. And the last week, we're going to talk about Usha and Saraswati and Aditi, the divine dawn, and Saraswati, the river of divine inspiration, and Aditi, the mother of the devas, the mother of the legions of light, the infinite divine mother. So that's where we're going to go. There's going to be meditations and journaling and interactivity and, you know,